Sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones we can piece together after the fact. A quick search, a missing detail, a comment thread hinting at something truly awful. It's amazing how a simple tran can unlock a hidden world. Today, I want to share one such story with you. It happened on July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning was quiet, humid. The air was heavy, thick with the memory of the previous night's rain. But by evening, something truly terrible would happen. Something that would shock everyone who worked there. The man at the center of it was Reggie Peters. He was 32 years old, originally from Britain. He worked there as a farm advisor, trying to improve the water systems for growing palm trees. From what I understand, people knew him as a quiet man, very good at his job. He liked to walk the farm alone, jotting down problems in a small notebook he always carried. Reggie had been working in Indonesia for about 4 months. In that time, he'd taken hundreds of photos of bugs, birds, and other animals. He seemed to genuinely love learning about all the different creatures that lived around the farm. Apparently, the workers noticed that Reggie never scared away snakes or lizards. Instead, he would kneel down, observing them closely. On that particular day, Reggie went out to do his regular work. The rainy season was approaching, so he needed to check the water ditches. If those ditches got blocked, the crops could flood, you see. That morning, he packed his notebook, a measuring tape, and his phone, planning to record notes as he went. Around noon, 2 workers named Amir and Luthi saw Reggie near a muddy ditch. He was kneeling, writing in his notebook as usual. They joked with him about the huge snakes that local people claimed to see near the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he would love to see one of these big snakes up close. The workers later said he didn't seem worried about their warnings at all. He seemed to think their concerns were just old stories, nothing more. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles. Rows of palm trees were separated by narrow water channels. The ground was soft, muddy from the recent rain, making some areas quite slippery. Dragonflies flitted over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant whine of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs in the ditches. The heat made everything feel still, heavy. Large snakes, reticulated pythons, live in this area. They're among the largest snakes in the world. They can grow to be longer than 20 feet and weigh over 200 pounds. They hunt by hiding, waiting near the water for animals like pigs or dogs to come close. Sometimes they even attack people. It doesn't happen often in this part of Indonesia, but the snakes have been moving closer to where people work. Their natural homes destroyed. The local people knew to stay away from these snakes. Some even carried long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie still hadn't returned to the camp. Amir began to worry and walked toward the last place he'd seen Reggie. The farm was almost silent, save for the constant buzzing of insects. That's when Amir saw something that made him freeze with fear. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel, and just a few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's middle section was hugely swollen, as if it had eaten a very large animal. Amir stood completely still, then started shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men were standing there, watching the snake as it slowly began moving toward the bushes. The swollen middle part dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from a safe distance. The python made a loud hissing sound, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth. It coiled up, ready to defend itself. The snake was massive, reaching about 15 feet long. None of the workers were brave enough to get close. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept watching the snake carefully. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. There's a particular horror in the idea of being consumed whole. I remember one case vividly. A worker named Reggie. A broad, uneven bulge in a snake. It was too large to be any animal I recognized. The men who saw it, they knew somehow that something terrible had happened. It took several minutes for the police to kill the python, and when they cut it open, Reggie's body, curled up, covered in slime. Then another case. March 15th, 2014, Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India. The air was cool after a hot day. 2 travellers were sleeping in a tent, unaware that a snake had quietly crawled inside. Clare Johnson, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, Australia, had quit her job to travel around Asia. She'd saved for 2 years, wanting to see as much of the world as possible. Her friends knew her as adventurous, but careful. She researched the places she stayed, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Ranthambore was a dream for her. She longed to photograph wild tigers. She'd even seen one that day, a female near a waterhole. She stayed at a cheap eco camp outside the park, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train from Jaipur. The camp was basic but clean, with tents built on raised platforms. Claire was meticulous, always shaking out her shoes and zipping the tent properly. That evening, it was cool enough that she zipped the canvas door all the way, leaving only a small opening for air. The camp was next to dry grassland, acacia trees providing shade. At night, insects buzzed, and peacocks called. The ground was hard dirt covered with leaves, perfect for reptiles hunting before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan. They usually avoid people, but sometimes enter human areas for food or warmth. They can grow to 6 feet and have venom strong enough to kill a person within hours without treatment. Local guides warn campers to check their bedding, as snakes sometimes crawl inside unnoticed. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke to a rustling sound. Half asleep, she turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam revealed a spectacled cobra coiled inches from Claire's sleeping bag, head raised. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep, her bare ankle touching the snake. It bit her twice, fangs sinking into her skin above her heel. It happened so fast that Lara almost missed it, until Claire gasped. Lara screamed, waking the camp. Claire sat up, grabbing her ankle, where 2 small holes marked the bites. Camp workers ran over with flashlights, spotting the snake as it crawled out. Claire's breathing quickened, her eyes looking strange and glassy. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way. Her voice was quiet as she said her legs felt like jelly before she collapsed onto her mat. The camp had no antivenom. Staff put Clare in a jeep to drive her to the hospital, Lara pressing a scarf above the bites to slow the poison. The drive took over 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Clare stopped responding. Her skin turned pale, cold, and damp. At the small rural clinic, the medical staff said there was nothing they could do. I've always been struck by how quickly a single moment can alter everything. A lapse in awareness, a misplaced step, and suddenly, lives are irrevocably changed. A story I came across recently brought this home with a painful clarity. It's about a young woman named Lara, a backpacker in Australia, who learned a harsh lesson about respecting the wild. Her story, shared quietly for years online, serves as a stark reminder to those who romanticize sleeping close to nature without understanding the very real dangers. Later that day, after Lara's tragic encounter, her parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They requested that her body be cremated following local customs. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided to continue operating, but they took a crucial step, hiring a local snake expert. This expert began giving weekly talks to new guests, teaching them how to properly check their tents and where to keep lights on at night to deter snakes. Lara eventually returned to Germany. She later wrote a detailed account of what happened on a travel website, a warning to other backpackers to always meticulously check their tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. This incident, as tragic as it was, underscores the critical importance of travelers taking safety precautions seriously, especially when venturing into wilderness areas. Even experienced and careful travelers can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. Proper preparation and awareness, it seems, can be truly life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. Then there's the story of Jorge Cruz. It was September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge was 42 years old and had worked in this orchard his entire life. He rose before sunrise each day to check the water systems, prune the trees, and teach his eldest son how to discern healthy fruit from diseased. People in the village knew Jorge as a dependable man, the kind who would repair broken carts for his neighbors, or lend them tools without expecting anything in return. He also had a habit from childhood. He preferred to work without shoes, saying it helped him feel the ground better and move more quickly when climbing the lower branches. The afternoon was intensely hot, the air heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves with such force that nothing seemed to stir. This orchard had been in his family for generations. On this particular day, the usual routine would be shattered by an event that changed everything in an instant. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo, picking limes on the far side of the grove, near a pile of cut tree branches left after a recent clearing. The three men were joking about the heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge wore his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old faded shirt. He reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to pull the fruit closer. The ground was hard dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, moving shadows across the ground. It was very quiet, so small sounds, a lime falling, clothes brushing against bark, were easily heard. The men were focused on their work and conversation, not particularly aware of potential dangers. A type of poisonous snake, Bothrops asper, known locally as the tersopielo, or naka, inhabits Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied, typically growing to be 3 to 5 feet long. They possess a highly dangerous venom that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding at the bite site, and can disrupt blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. Their camouflage is remarkable. They blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining motionless until someone steps nearby. A bite typically causes extreme pain and rapid swelling. That morning, neighbors had mentioned seeing more snakes due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had even urged him to wear boots while clearing brush. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a perfect, temporary hiding place for such snakes. Raúl later said that he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck with incredible speed, biting the skin just above his ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge let out a sharp cry of pain and saw him recoil, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin became bruised and discolored. He started vomiting and sweating profusely, and his face turned pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they immobilized Jorge's leg with a splint made from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The trip to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he grew confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg and noted his weak pulse and low blood pressure. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no antivenom, the specific medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to call the regional health center, requesting assistance, but the nearest supply of antivenom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition deteriorated rapidly. He became increasingly disoriented, and his breathing became shallow. The medical staff were helpless to improve his condition. By evening, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and assist his breathing, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it vanished into the dense plant life. I'll never forget reading about the lime trees. Even after a tragic accident involving ants, they continued to produce fruit. From then on, each harvest season began with a reminder to all the workers about being careful. It's a simple, powerful act of remembrance. It reminds me of another story, one that took place on May 2nd, 2018, when the air over the Cross River felt heavy and still. Mina Belagan, a 19-year-old, had just returned from university a week earlier. She loved spending her afternoons at the river. Everyone knew Mina for her lively personality, and she often brought her cousins to swim with her. The older villagers had warned them that snakes were more active during the dry season, but Mina didn't think much of it. She believed that nothing dangerous ever happened in the shallow water. On that day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her for a swim. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before walking into the cool water. Mina was planning to go back to school soon, dreaming of starting a small community project to teach younger children how to swim safely. She had always thought of the river as a place full of life, not danger. Because Mina felt so comfortable in the water, her cousins trusted her and followed her without worry. The afternoon was the kind where every sound seemed to carry far. The river's surface looked calm, reflecting the cloudless sky, but local people often said the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks that fishermen liked to use. The air was humid, and dragonflies flew just above the water's surface. Even though it was a bright day, the thick plants on the other side of the river cast long shadows over the deeper parts of the water. African rock pythons, the biggest snakes on the continent, can grow to be more than 20 feet long. They hunt by staying very still until an animal comes close. Then they bite with powerful jaws before wrapping their body around their prey, squeezing it until it stops breathing. While attacks on people are rare, these snakes are known to catch and eat goats, dogs, and even large animals like antelopes. During the dry season, they often hunt near water sources that are getting smaller, because that's where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle that he had seen a very large python lying in the sun on a log nearby. Children had been told not to swim until the rains came and made the water levels higher. But Mina insisted that the shallow bend where they swam was safe. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour, playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch caught in the current. But when it curved and moved silently across the water's surface, fear spread through the group of children. The shape moved forward quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils got tighter, forcing the air out of her lungs. The water became violent and choppy as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran as fast as they could back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they got to the river bend, the snake was still moving around in the water, but had pulled Mina deeper under. The men went into the water and cut at the python over and over until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for several minutes. Her skin was cold and pale, and her lips were a deep blue color. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth, while others stood back in shocked silence. When they pressed on her chest, water came out of her mouth and nose, mixing with the mud under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene with a phone. The sound of shouting and rushing water mixed with the noise of long knives hitting the snake's body. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign that she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially during times when wild animals were more likely to come near human areas looking for water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. Then there was the incident on June 10th, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was extremely hot under a clear sky. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because there's a particular kind of tragedy in seeing expertise undermined by simple human limits. I think about Sammy often. He was a steady hand, a man with years of experience handling snakes. He taught new volunteers, favouring hands-on demonstrations over lectures, believing that experience was the best way to reduce danger. Local people trusted him because he was methodical, never rushing, always correcting sloppy technique with a quiet word. But even Sammy was vulnerable. The festival that year had drawn a larger crowd, and the schedule was tighter than usual. He'd been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, spending hours in the sun. He'd skipped a full breakfast to keep things running smoothly and was feeling drained, attributing it to the heat and fatigue. His co-workers urged him to rest, to drink water, but he kept working, driven by a sense of responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits surrounded by temporary barriers, a raised platform for the announcer, folding chairs for the audience. The air hung thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water were nearby, but the layout was cramped, leaving volunteers exposed to the sun. People crowded the fence, phones raised to capture every movement. The setup, intended for clear viewing, reduced the handler's space and limited opportunities for both them and the animals to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, potent pit vipers averaging 4 to 5 feet in length, possess a venom that causes tissue damage and bleeding, potentially triggering shock if a large dose is delivered. These snakes can strike with surprising speed and reach. Under stress, they might twist unexpectedly, altering a handler's grip and exposing unprotected skin. Even the most skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is agitated or when heat and repeated handling elevate its stress. Earlier that day, organisers had cautioned volunteers to take turns, to limit heavy handling during the hottest hours. A minor incident that morning had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks and drink water. Medical personnel stood by with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard the instructions, agreed with them, but the pull of the crowd and the relentless schedule drew him back. He took a heavy western diamondback from a colleague and stepped into the pit, wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. With a practiced motion, he lifted the snake. For a moment, the crowd seemed to relax, calmed by Sammy's steady presence. Then the snake, stressed, shifted its body and twisted violently. It lunged, its fangs sinking into the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was, but his face flushed and sweat beaded on his forehead. He continued talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling reached his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers rushed him to the first aid tent as soon as it was clear he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied Prez to slow the venom's spread, started IV fluids, and administered the first vials of antivenom. But his breathing grew shallower, his skin cold and blotched. Despite the rapid response, his blood press plummeted, his pulse fading. Witnesses later recounted the desperate attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting regional medics to review emergency procedures and conduct practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began working at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over showmanship. The festival board documented the incident, creating a checklist outlining demonstration protocols, maximum handling times, required breaks, and a swift evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It reminds me of another case, one that unfolded far away, in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, on March 15, 2016. There, amidst towering mahogany trees near the Sanka River, a converted logging camp stood isolated on 50 acres of abandoned land. It had once been a legitimate primate research station, properly permitted, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating the facility illegally for 3 years after her permits expired. She refused to surrender Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and sense of entitlement had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge the expiration of her research permits. Lacking formal primate training, she relied on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods found online. Her social media posts revealed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar through intimidation. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night. Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. The Cameroon Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays, the silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. When I read that line for the first time, it stayed with me for days. It's a stark image, isn't it? The aftermath of unimaginable violence. The story of Erica and Caesar is a tragedy, a confluence of errors and hubris that ended in the worst possible way. Warning signs had been mounting for months, you see, as Caesar's behaviour deteriorated under improper care. Western lowland gorillas are immensely powerful. Adult males possess the strength of perhaps 10 humans. Their massive hands can exert crushing force, and their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone. Despite their generally peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictably violent, especially when confronted with perceived threats to their territory. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity conditions and inadequate social interaction. These magnificent creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclos, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod fashioned from old logging equipment and unlocked the heavy gate to his 20x30 FT reinforced pen. This decision would prove fatal. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from a passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375 lb silverback charged across the enclos with terrifying speed. His massive body slammed into Erica's chest with the force of a small vehicle, launching her backward into the fetal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets with crushing press. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted with brutal force, snapping her femur bone. The jagged fracture tore through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her rib cage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow and labored as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed with methodical press. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning, when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Center. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief, while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22nd, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to this secluded spot just 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different from previous years was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbours it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclos and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators perfectly designed for stealth hunting, with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 ft in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 libs of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, it's a mistake to think that raising a wild animal in captivity somehow tames its fundamental nature. I've seen it time and again in the archives. The tragic belief that affection can override instinct. The story of Landon and his cougar Scout is a chilling example. Even though Scout had been raised around humans, his hunting behavior became more pronounced in unfamiliar environments. Landon made a fatal error in judgment. He thought Scout's upbringing had somehow domesticated the animal's wild nature, and decided to let the 3-year-old cougar stretch his legs in the wilderness. As the family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged, immediately surveying the unfamiliar territory. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts kicked in the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers. Scout's pupils dilated as he crouched behind a fallen log, his muscles coiling. Then, in complete silence, He launched himself, covering 20 feet in a single leap. The cougar struck Landon squarely in the back. His 4-inch claws sank deep into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip struggling prey. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Scout's canine teeth punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down, leaving Landon completely unable to move. His face submerged, he drowned within 90 seconds. Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming. Then, the cougar dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush line. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck, where they remained until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership. Another case that comes to mind took place on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch property in South Texas. The remote estate provided the perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer. His thrill-seeking personality and desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown into a powerful 180-pound predator, but Marcus believed their bond from her cubhood would protect him. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. Luna had been refusing food for 4 days. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated. Neighbors reported hearing strange vocalizations during the night. Jaguars possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. They deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've always been struck by the stories where the line between human intention and raw instinct blurs, often with tragic consequences. Consider the case of Marcus, a man in Texas who kept a jaguar named Luna. It ended with Luna, with the surgical precision of a predator, ending Marcus's life. Her bite force, a staggering 1,500 pounds per square inch, crushed his windpipe and severed arteries in seconds. The scene Lisa discovered the next morning was gruesome, a testament to Luna's wild instincts. It renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership, a point Marcus's family echoed in their statement. Then there's the story of Brianna Ellis, a marine biology student in Homestead, Florida. On June 14, 2018, she lost her life to an alligator named Brutus. She had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a roadside attraction 2 years prior, believing she could provide a better environment for him while studying his behavior. She even hand-fed him, confident that her scientific understanding gave her an edge. But the warning signs were there. Increased aggression, strange splashing sounds at night, the alligator floating motionless for hours. Classic hunting behavior. American alligators, I've learned, are among the most efficient predators, virtually unchanged for millions of years, their jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of press per square inch. Brianna made a fatal mistake one evening while retrieving her pH testing equipment from the pond. Ignoring her friend's suggestion to use a pool net, she waded into the water herself. Dusk, of course, is the most active hunting period for alligators. Brutus approached with stealth, his 350-pound body creating no visible wake. As Brianna bent down, focused on her task, Brutus struck with devastating force, his jaws crushing her femur. I find myself often reflecting on how easily the wild can reclaim what we think we've tamed, sometimes with brutal force. A woman named Brianna learned this lesson tragically when an alligator named Brutus dragged her to her death in a pond. The attack was relentless, a 2-minute struggle beneath the surface until she went limp. The dive team only recovered scattered remains. The following day, Brutus had retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the reptile, and wildlife officials worked to capture and relocate Brutus. The incident prompted immediate changes to local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas. Another such tragedy occurred on October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among the trees. It was home to Shah Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator. His career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. Bitter and paranoid, he'd retreated to this inherited family property after losing his license following a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions. and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 mph and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily crushing human skulls. Their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15x20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that makes black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation, born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbours noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an I find myself often thinking about the strange and sometimes tragic relationships we humans form with the animal world. How trust, or the illusion of it, can lead us into incredibly dangerous situations. It was March 22nd, 2015, near Houston, Texas. The air was thick with humidity, making sounds carry in unusual ways. Behind a small house, a Bengal tiger paced restlessly inside a chain-link enclosure. The tiger belonged to Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic, a man who preferred the company of engines and animals to people. He'd started with snakes and iguanas, then a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger he'd gotten from a private breeder. He kept Raja in a large, reinforced enclosure, and neighbours would sometimes see him walking with the tiger on a chain lead, talking to it like a friend. He believed Raja recognised his scent and tone, that the animal would never hurt him. He told a friend that it was all about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast. A friend, Luis Alvarez, had stopped by and was watching as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, his tail lashing. Construction noise from a nearby property seemed to be agitating him. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds, but would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers, I should mention, are apex predators. Their bite can crush bone with over 1,000 pounds of pres. Even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts. Males can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with incredible force. And they rarely growl as a warning. Movement is often the trigger. Luis stood about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate to replace old straw. He'd left the outer gate partially open for convenience. Luis said Raja continued pacing, muscles tensing with each pass. Michael glanced up, muttered something, and went back to shoveling. Then Luis saw the tiger freeze. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him down. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed, clamping its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted, threw a wrench, but it was useless. Michael swung the shovel, striking Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Luis grabbed gravel and hurled it, screaming for the tiger to stop. But Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. When deputies arrived, they waited for animal control. When Raja charged the fencing, one officer fired his rifle, hitting the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable. Investigators noted the lack of a secondary containment system, no safety barrier, no secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled the arrangements quietly, declining interviews. Fewer than 20 people attended the funeral. Neighbours left flowers at the fence. The straw inside was still stained dark where the attack happened. Then there's the story from January 14th, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. Behind a row of warehouses, a private experiment was nearing its breaking point. Ahmad Ferdos, a 34-year-old auto parts importer, was known for his patience and meticulousness. But he also had a secret fascination with exotic animals. I've spent countless hours poring over accounts of human-animal interactions, and some stories, despite their brevity, leave an indelible mark. The tale of Ahmad and the Komodo dragon is one of those. He treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. The dragon's pen was quite small, really, designed for a creature half its size. Ahmad fed it chicken and goat, often by hand, so proud that the animal trusted him. Some of his employees warned him, saying the dragon wasn't tame anymore. But Ahmad would just smile, convinced it knew him. That Thursday morning was overcast and still, with the faint smell of diesel in the air. Ahmad had skipped feeding the dragon the night before, preoccupied with a problem in the shipment. At sunrise, he noticed the dragon's water basin was overturned and filthy. He wanted to clean it before the day began. The gate creaked as he entered the enclosure. The dragon was in the far corner, motionless. Komodo dragons, as you know, can grow up to 10 feet long, their bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom, a cocktail of anticoagulants and toxins, causes rapid blood loss and lowers blood pressure, weakening prey through shock. They are ambush predators, capable of sudden bursts of speed. In captivity, they can become defensive, even aggressive, especially if handled often or underfed. Yudi was working in the front of the warehouse when he heard a clang of metal, then a low thud, followed by a sharp cry. He dropped his clipboard and ran towards the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto Ahmad's right calf, teeth sunk deep through fabric and skin. Blood was already darkening the concrete. Ahmad kicked with his free leg, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, its head jerking back, then lunged again, jaws clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head, tearing loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole leaning by the fence and swung hard, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping. When it faced him again, its throat bulged with each breath, saliva stringing from its jaws. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a thick smear of blood. The dragon lunged again, catching his side just below the ribs. Its jaws locked, teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a gasping rasp. Yudi struck again and again, shouting, until the creature finally backed off a few feet. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red, the smell of iron heavy in the air. Yudi ran to the gate, dragging a burlap sack from a shelf. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged toward the sack, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was gone. Later reports confirmed multiple deep lacerations to the leg, arm, and abdomen, with significant internal bleeding. Death was attributed to massive blood loss and shock from the venom. Veterinarians who examined the dragon said it had shown signs of food aggression, triggered when prey or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, just under 7 feet long and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation centre. Officials identified it as originating from Rinca Island, confirming it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story barely made the local newspapers, but within the warehouse community, it circulated quietly, a warning told in fragments. It was May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear and still, the kind of quiet that hangs heavy before the heat. A line of spruce trees framed the small animal sanctuary Mark Jennings had built. Inside, one enclosure stood larger than the rest, its occupant pacing slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. Mark Jennings was 49, a former wildlife handler. I think about how quickly things can change, how a seemingly normal morning can descend into absolute chaos in a matter of seconds. A sanctuary, rolling pasture bordered by pines, early summer sunlight. It sounds peaceful, doesn't it? But that morning, the enclos were quiet, except for the sound of pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark, the owner, had reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. He'd left the previous evening to visit his sister. The next day, he texted Aaron around 10 soon, receiving no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When Mark pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclos was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclos. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Marks shouting, "Stop!" Abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. Then, on August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa, the air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive. Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behaviour early and told Johann that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johann brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johann took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There are moments I've encountered in my research that still haunt me. One such moment is the story of Jan, an animal keeper at a wildlife lodge. He entered Simba, the lion's enclos, to do some routine sweeping. But within moments, the situation turned deadly. I can only imagine what was going through the minds of the other workers as Jan approached the gate, Simba inside, pacing. The lion's ears shifted forward, body low to the ground. Jan entered through the inner gate, closing it behind him, but leaving the outer one slightly ajar. He began sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked. The worker continued filming, fascinated by Jon's calmness. A few moments passed without issue, but then Simba began circling. His tail flicked sharply. From the video and witnesses later interviewed, Simba's behavior changed fast. He lowered his head, crouching, then lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Jon yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm, but Simba shifted his grip, teeth sinking into the back of his neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Johann several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jon tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence. But it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers from a nearby property arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Jan. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Jan's body free using a canvas stretcher, his clothing torn and soaked through with blood. Autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite movements and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed the same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab in Toria for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. His wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclosure was sealed for good. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a tin awning, built strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, two chimpanzees making sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for two young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 lb, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 lb, their jaws capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1,200 lb per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. Linda. I still think about the silence that fell after Matthew dropped into the enclosure, broken only by the soft panting of the chimps. It's a chilling image. The boy falling, the screams from above, and then that quiet anticipation. It was April 17th, 2015, a bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. Yellow school buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small private animal park, the kind of roadside zoo where the paint is fading and rust eats away at the fences. Families with strollers mingled with school groups, teachers trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. Near the centre of the park was the chimpanzee exhibit, a low chain-link railing, a shallow algae-lined moat. A hand-painted sign warned, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the whole enclosure looked outdated compared to what you'd see at a modern, accredited zoo. One of those students was Matthew Collins, a 12-year-old 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse. His father operated a forklift. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, the kind of boy who liked to climb trees, rooftops, anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by mowing lawns, determined to get the best photos of the chimps. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance. A few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop, but he ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below, landing hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. Then one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors later said the sounds were chilling, deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The 2 chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite, but a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the 2 chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt. I read once of a similar incident. It was a chilling reminder of how quickly the lines between us and the animal kingdom can blur, and how fragile our understanding of those boundaries can be. In that case, a woman named Linda, who had worked closely with chimpanzees for years, met a tragic end. She tried to crawl toward the gate, blood pooling beneath her. Buddy grabbed her by the hair, dragging her back. He bit her neck once, then again, each time slower, deliberate. Her body stiffened, then slackened. Rosie backed away slightly, lips curled, hands trembling. The attack lasted less than a minute, but to Tom it stretched endlessly. The sound of skin tearing, replaced only by his own shouting. By the time deputies arrived about 10 minutes later, the yard was silent. The chimps stood near the body, panting. Buddy had blood on his hands and chest. Rosie sat beside the gate, rocking slightly. Officers attempted to use tranquilizers, but Buddy charged the fence, snapping at the air. A deputy then fired 2 rifle rounds through the bars, hitting him in the chest and neck. Both animals fell inside the enclosure, their bodies still twitching when Tom was led away by paramedics. Deputies found Linda near the center of the cage. She had suffered massive trauma, scalp avulsion, facial disfigurement, and multiple fractures. Her pulse was gone before help arrived. Investigators noted that the outer gate had not been locked, a lapse in Linda's usually strict routine. Tom refused interviews. He moved away within months, leaving the house empty and the enclosure to rust behind tall weeds. At the funeral, held quietly in a mobile chapel, a few former co-workers attended. They remembered Linda as gentle and curious. But behind the condolences lingered a shared disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclosure was later dismantled, leaving only a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, where the hose couldn't wash everything away. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. I keep picturing that phone, smeared with blood on the kitchen counter. A desperate attempt to connect, cut short by unimaginable violence. It happened on June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut. The afternoon was quiet, filled with the sounds of lawnmowers and cars. Houses lined Rockledge Drive, each with trimmed lawns and small front porches. But inside one of these ordinary homes, a woman named Belinda Holmes was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. Belinda was 57 years old and known for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd gotten him as an infant, ignoring state laws, and raised him like a child. She dressed him in clothes, fed him at the table, and drove him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted to him, convinced she could control him like any other pet. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared as he looked out the windows, and neighbors watched Belinda walk him on a leash. She treated him like family and defended him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger. By age 12, he weighed over 120 lbs, and Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset. She insisted he was gentle, misunderstood. The house itself showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms. On that warm June day, with the windows open, Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise. Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks, but years of living in a human household hadn't erased his natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly, with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings. Months earlier, a neighbour called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard, chased cars, and pounded on a vehicle. State officials reminded Belinda that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face. Neighbours heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbours running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Neighbours gathered outside. I'll never forget reading about the screams. The news reports said they would stay with the witnesses forever. It was the story of Belinda, whose life was forever changed after a horrific attack. She survived, but only after multiple surgeries, and was left disfigured and needing constant care. That case, as awful as it was, at least sparked national attention. Laws were tightened, and private chimpanzee ownership was banned entirely in Connecticut. Eventually, the house where it happened was sold, the new owners forever aware of its dark history. But there are other stories too, ones that echo with the same chilling horror. May 28, 2017. Outskirts of Austin, Texas. Memorial Day. A bend in the Colorado River. Families gathered for a barbecue at a rented picnic site. It seemed idyllic. Grass, live oaks, open water. Cars parked along the dirt road. Children playing. the afternoon heat shimmering off the river. But one guest brought an animal that should only ever be seen behind glass. The victim was Daniel Ortiz, 36, a high school track coach. Weekends, he ran the trails and met friends for cookouts. The steady type, always prepared with extra water and sunscreen. That day, he'd finished a 5-mile loop and stopped by the Riverside barbecue after a friend's text. He saw the small crowd near the tables and walked over, curious. Daniel felt comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, calming anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept his distance, staying behind a low trash can, giving the animal space. The chimpanzee wore a harness, and the owner chatted with onlookers, handing out fruit. Daniel wanted a photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he'd seen on a normal Sunday. He moved a few feet forward, holding his phone, angling for a shot past the crowd. The chimp shifted, pacing in a small circle on the leash, sniffing, reaching. A thin musk drifted on the breeze, mixing with the charcoal smoke. Adult male chimpanzees aren't meant for public gatherings. Their social groups are ruled by sudden violence. Years of human handling can't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, competition for food. It can all erupt in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin, but this site was just beyond the boundary. Few knew the handler lacked proper permits. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler with a red cup. The owner shortened the leash, but kept feeding it fruit. A runner called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for the chimp to settle, to get one steady shot. The tension increased. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate, grunting, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped closer, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. A beat of stillness, except for the wind. Then the lunge. A blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip didn't loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him. Daniel tried to roll, to get his feet under him, but the chimp climbed his torso, hammering his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket, streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung an arm and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked, landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, short grunts from Daniel with every bite. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner looped the leash under the chimp's chest, and pulled it toward a picnic table leg, creating a barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out within seconds, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had been. I remember the date clearly, September 14th, 2018. I remember thinking, as I read the report, how easily a carefully planned event could turn chaotic. A small independent production studio in Los Angeles, a daytime talk show segment. It all seemed so ordinary. But the appearance of a chimpanzee named Mike would change everything. Kevin Harris, an experienced animal trainer, had worked with Mike since he was a baby. Kevin believed that Mike knew the rhythm of production life and could stay calm under noise and movement. But handlers familiar with chimps knew the truth. Adulthood changes everything. The set was simple: a sofa, coffee table, a painted backdrop. Mike, wearing only a light collar and leash, sat on a stool beside Kevin, shifting constantly. Before cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing stress behaviors, but the director insisted they proceed. As recording began, the room brightened. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted. The chimp released and struck again. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical. Kevin's movement slowed. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch. Kevin survived, but barely. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The footage was never aired. The lesson came at an unbearable cost. Then, on October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda, I was reading about Martin Blake, a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer. He had spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa and wanted one last series of images before flying home. I've always been drawn to the intersection of human ambition and the raw power of the natural world. There are moments when that intersection turns tragic. I remember reading the account of a photographer named Martin. He was found dead on arrival, his camera bag holding memory cards with his last images, the forest edge, a red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of a chimp stepping from the vines. Martin was trying to photograph chimpanzees in Uganda, hoping to capture a unique image against the backdrop of the mountain road. He had experience photographing gorillas and monkeys, but his drive sometimes led him close to danger. He parked near a bend in the road and started walking along the shoulder, camera in hand. A local motorbike rider shouted at him, gesturing towards the trees. But Martin waved back, seemingly more concerned about the speeding trucks around the blind corners. The highway sharply cut through green ridges, vegetation pressing close on both sides. Chimpanzees sometimes appeared along these margins, able to easily navigate the embankments and ditches lining the road. In their shrinking habitat, the edge of the asphalt had become another boundary to patrol, and, when startled, aggression was their first response. Rangers often warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving through these forest roads. Locals avoided walking alone, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told as much at his lodge, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. Only a few minutes into his walk, he saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Two smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in. He even stepped forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to descend. It took only seconds for the chimp to drop onto the asphalt, closing the gap on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps reappeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were raw. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt far longer before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp finally released him and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse.